Hello there, I'm Sandy Allnock. Welcome to my YouTube channel where today we're going to talk art critiques. I have 30 paintings that I'm going to share with you, and this is not just for watercolorists. This is for anybody who wants to learn how to look at your own artwork and assess it so you can keep growing. Let's talk about all of that, shall we? In the month of April this year, I joined with a bunch of students who wanted to go through the 30 Days to More Confident Watercolor Sketching course. And that's one of my classes that I developed that tries to develop a habit in artists that you will paint something every day, just a little something. And these are on small postcards. So the techniques are all reduced, everything's small, and you can get it done pretty quickly. That's the idea behind the class. And there were some people that were taking it for the second time or the third time going through it. And it's helpful to go through it with other people and see what they're doing, what they're learning. So we were sharing all during the month of April. Now, not all of us made it through in just April. I fell off the wagon at one point. But what I was trying to do was something more advanced because I was at my level trying to learn more from this course. And what I ended up doing was making larger paintings. So instead of doing just a very small one that I could get done in 15 or 20 minutes, I did paintings that were an eighth sheet. And there were some of them that came out great. And there were some of them that had some issues and they succeeded in other areas. And I want to tell you about what my assessment is. But my assessment is based on me and where I am and comparing my own work to what I was trying to accomplish, not comparing my work to someone else's. And you're going to see the 30 paintings. You'll see on the left side of the screen the painting from 2022 on a postcard. Remember, the size is very different. And then on the right, you'll see the painting as it was done in 2025. And I'll talk about some of those differences. So let us begin. The first number of days, I had tried to find a photograph that was similar or had some elements from the original scene because in the class, everything came out of my head and nobody could see inside my head. And I thought, well, maybe if I provide a photo, that will help. That did quit after a number of days of doing it because I was spending hours trying to find photos. This painting on day one was 3 potted plants, and I showed a bunch of techniques in the video how to create different kinds of, watercolor dropping into wet puddles, all that sort of thing. A lot of techniques that you'll need later on in the class. And when it got to finding a photo, I found one that had a window with 3 plants in front of it. It had interesting lighting, and it was far more advanced, of course, than what was done in the lesson. I was not expecting anyone to go try those paintings just because they were more advanced, and the class is not meant for people at my level. But nonetheless, I had in some of the lessons, and you'll see some later in this video, I had some step-by-step photos that I took along the way. I didn't always do that because I got busy. Second day was this painting. The goal of this lesson had been making that background and the napkin that's underneath of the potted plant, etc. So when it came to creating my own painting, I found a photo that had more interesting plants in it that were very specific ones. And I painted those by overpainting the leaves in the background. That was not as successful as I had hoped. If I'd had a different color, I think the green would have come out more refreshing, but it didn't. But the napkin on the ground, I loved that. I love how it came out and the shadows that I created from the flowers that are cast onto the table surface just came out lovely. And I really enjoyed that one. Next up was this one, which I found to be a whole lot of fun too. Just loose flowers in a bucket and learning a little bit about how to make flooring and perspective. And when I went to do it from real photos, I combined 2 photos. I had one that had purple flowers in it, and I also found a brick floor
And I started working from that and let my floor get a little bit on the crazy side, which was super fun. This was such a successful painting. This is going to end up being the one that's on my zipper pouch for World Watercolor Month. So when that time comes up, you will see that resurfacing, and you can get yourself a zipper pouch for your supplies with that painting on it. Next up is this guy. I kind of liked the very simple background of the one in the lesson that was done first. And it had a conglomeration of all different kinds of plants. I wanted to start trying to pull people into seeing how you could make different clumps of plants in a container. But the one that I found the photo for had a window in the background and had some very specific plants. I do love the leaves that I created on that right hand side, the way that they just got so simple. And I started coming to a realization that you'll see developing in the next few paintings. Day 5, this one was a set of stairs and teaching people how to make shadows that'll make it look like the stairs are kind of jumping, so that shadow isn't just one straight line, it kicks over a little bit. And then when I came to trying to find a photo of plants on stairs, it was way too many plants on way too many stairs. There was perspective issues to deal with on the steps, but all the different plants were a lot of fun, and I think it was successful. I still enjoyed this painting quite a bit, even if it was super complex. Next up was these two pots and learning a bit about how to render the cascading down different kinds of plants on them, brick floor under them, and each lesson as we go throughout the class, reflecting back on things we learned earlier. The new painting, I found some gorgeous pots. I did have to close up the distance between them from the photo that I found. And then I decided to do something really insane and try to make two different kinds of like palmy branch things. That was a challenge. Oh my goodness. Trying to figure out how to do that so that one plant looked like it was in front of the other. But those pots were gorgeous. The thing that I realized that I needed to learn more about how to do, I wanted to create something else in this, like a big shadow, as if there's a wall or something blocking sunshine. And I don't think I accomplished that with the big shadows that I did. But I also don't think they're so distracting that they're terrible, because those pots look so amazing that I'm not really worried about the things that didn't go all that great. For day 7, we have a barrel of flowers. And, there's different textures in the painting. There's rocks, there's the wood of the barrel itself. There's a really blurry background that lets the flowers pop because the blurry dark background sets them off. So for the new painting, I found a couple photos to combine. I was looking for something with more interesting rocks in the background and had fun doing some dry brush on those. The background in the photo was a little on the crazy side, so I had to simplify, but that challenged me to simplify, and that's something that I really want to do more in my watercolors. The barrel was completely different than the one in the original, and I kind of like the barrel in the original better. The other one was sort of falling apart, and while that has some interest to it, I kind of like the other barrel better. But my flowers came out all right, and that background was lighter, but it still sets off the darker flowers in the painting itself in that barrel. So next up, we have day number 8. And this was one of those little turning points for me. I started off in the postcard class trying to show people how to make a wall that has a little bit of an angle to it, because I do believe that people need to start understanding perspective, because a lot of times when you're watercoloring and things don't come out right, it's often because you don't know anything about perspective, and that means your painting is going to be off because the perspective is off. And even if everything in your technique is great, your perspective can throw everything for a little loop, and then you'll be dissatisfied. So I wanted to include some perspective throughout the course. So this year's painting, I had more fun than a barrel of monkeys with the flowers. because I started realizing at this point that it was the scale that was bugging me. The little tiny postcards just need a little tiny blob in order to make little tiny flowers. I can also paint really big flowers on a big painting, but this was an attempt to try to make flowers that were more of a middle size, and I hadn't done that before. This is not a common size that I paint all the time. I don't always paint at an eighth sheet size. I'm usually a quarter sheet person, and this was an attempt to see, could I keep it loose, but make my flowers more of shapes than anything. And that really worked out great. I loved the flowers in this. I absolutely love the brick wall in it. I think that came out fantastic. I'm not as thrilled with the color in the background, but I am so happy with the other things that that's kind of a non-issue for me. Next up is this one, and there had been some successful points in the earlier postcard painting that didn't really work out great in my larger painting. So there's rocks in there, there's plants in the background, and when I rendered this larger, the rocks I did great at. I love painting rocks. I'm weird that way. I just love the different kinds of shapes and everything they have. So the rocks came out great. The ground came out okay, and then we got to the flowers, and I felt like, "Ugh, yuck, yuck, yuck. I need to learn how to paint stock flowers like this." And that was gonna be something that I was gonna be trying throughout the rest of the 30 paintings. So next up, we get to day 10, and it's a curved path. It's got light cascading in from a different area and hitting the rocks and part of the path, creating some interesting shadows from the flowers that are there. And then I tried to render this again in a larger size and I struggled. The rocks came out fine, and I did do some simplification on those flowers on the left, but the other flowers leave something to be desired in my own perspective and what I was trying for, because I didn't get the richness of the postcard. I kind of liked that darkness of the postcard with the pop of light, and I didn't push that very much here because I was trying to figure out what to do with those stalk flowers. And, I just was not practiced enough at that point. So I figured that's another thing to remind me to start really working on practicing the flowers more. Then we got to this painting. And while it's kind of on the messy side, and a lot of students have struggled with it because it was all about trying to loosen up with the stairs and all of the plants and everything, and just kind of letting go a bit in the postcard version. Well, when it got to the larger one, I painted this thing like 4 times before I got to this result. And there were just lots of things to love here. I decided to make some things shapes, and it's something I talk about all the time, like trying to make shapes in your paintings and in your drawings instead of trying to paint every little object in there really helps because people recognize those things in the back as trees. Like you see them as trees, you don't need me to describe them to you as trees. And the stairs, I cleaned up quite a bit in order to not have them be quite as washy, but to still keep them on the loose side and let some colors blend. And then the flowers got crisper and cleaner. And I started playing around with positive and negatives, trying to do some negative painting around flower shapes to make them pop forward. And then in some of the lighter areas, using positive painting to indicate that there's more plants there, but not having to describe every single plant. And I absolutely loved how this one came out. Next up, we have day 12, and this rock wall has been the nemesis of many people. The idea I had for it was to show the rocks kind of curving around and going back in space, a little bit of perspective that way. And I realized it was a little awkward the way that the plants come down and cover the wall in certain places. Yeah, that one was a challenge for students quite a bit. But the one on the right, I I did some really great things, and then I did some head scratchers. So I found a photo of a wall, and it had some rocks down at the bottom, and I started getting excited about, oh, maybe if I just spill some rocks down onto the path, that'll be great. And then my rocks spilled onto the path don't look very much like rocks. They look more like slabs. So that was a little weird, but the daisies started working out beautifully, and I was really loving them. And I even, the stalks that are there, I even was more pleased with my stalks this time. I probably could have done with just daisies across the whole thing and been more satisfied, but it still worked. And this was also an attempt to see if I needed that dark background in the distance or did I need something light. And a lot of the things that, if you go through this class and look at the 2025 Redux at the bottom of the page, you'll see some things where I was just trying, what if we do the opposite? What if I try doing something light instead of something dark, or something dark instead of something light, or do a vertical instead of a horizontal? So you'll see some of those things play out as we go through the rest of these. Let me move on. We're on day 13 and I'm just yammering. So when you're looking at anything in perspective, the things that are in the foreground that are closer to you are going to be larger, and the ones that are in the distance are going to be smaller. So I was trying to communicate that idea by saying, let's make some flowers in the foreground that are big and then smaller ones in the distance. And then I started working with those same kind of flowers that I had practiced earlier to see if I could make a poppy field that did the same thing. I decided to just not worry about the path because I wanted to practice the flowers, and I focused on them. And just know that when you're working on anything in a class, you can redo the assignment in a way that helps you if there's something you want to learn. Incorporate something from the lesson that's trying to be taught so you can learn what's there for you. But if something doesn't work for you, then do what works. So this one was just all flowers, and I loved this painting. Just so fresh, and the simple shapes, rather than fussing over them, were just so nice. And I do want to figure out how to paint the kinds of flowers that are in the pink painting and, make them work better at a larger size. So that was a goal that I set for myself. Day 14 is a scene that was kind of in my head as somebody who walked my dogs in a particular park when they were little puppies. And there were these fields on the left that had kind of flowers that I wanted to see how would it look if we just splattered flowers on there and just let some random dots be there rather than painting and delineating every single flower, and then capturing uh, the dark shadow side of bushes, because there were always like really strong light coming in this particular area that we walked along. And I love those big dark bushes in contrast to the bright flowers on the other side. So then came this year's larger painting. My big bush got really oppressive. Oh my goodness, it got way darker than I wanted it to. And, sometimes that happens. I did succeed with the trees in the background. I loved how those came out because I did the same thing from an earlier painting, just letting them be shapes. And then just on the right-hand side of that grouping of trees, I let my brush make a few stem-like things so that it would look like there were some tree trunks there, but just letting that be there. So even in a painting that I didn't feel went all that well, I can always find something that I did that, proved that I learned something in a previous painting, which is always good to realize that you're growing and learning. Next up is day 15, this hanging wisteria over an arch. So it's the place in the class where we start working towards some more like man-made elements, and the arches and the bricks and doorways and that sort of thing. And created this pathway that curves around the other side, and doing lots of layers for the flowers to build up the shadows and that sort of thing. Got to this year's painting, and I had some great successes in here. I played around on scrap paper trying to figure out how I could paint wisteria in a looser fashion, and layering that really helped a lot to start putting down a very pale layer first, letting it trail down, and then successively smaller bits in there without worrying about having so much brightness in the small postcard version. I was trying to keep a lot of light, but this kept the light, but it kept it light purple, which was kind of fun. The background in the distance, I wanted to see if I could make that sort of blow out to be sunny on the other side, which worked nicely. And I loved my daisies in the foreground, but the rest of it, the The grasses and things on the other side of the arch came out okay. I wasn't super thrilled with the flower pots. I guess the pot I liked, but the flowers themselves didn't thrill me a whole lot. But I did use the brick technique from one of the earlier things that I had done, earlier paintings, and just kind of letting the colors bleed into each other and letting them be various neutrals worked out great here on the wall. And then we have this guy, which is a wall that has another arch with some vines growing on it. I wanted to show people how you can define the other side of something by having vines that are climbing on both sides. See the top of the vine wall by the fact that there's greens on the other side of it. And this year's came out very pale. But the challenge here for me was that a friend of mine and I had been in a discussion because she was asking for a critique of one of her paintings. And she had the most bluest blue in all of her shadows. Every shadow that she painted was with this one particular blue. And she's an oil painter. And we were talking about that. And she said she totally believes that shadows always have to be blue. And she challenged me to try it. And I tried it. And I'm not sure that worked because this whole thing just it felt like a very weird kind of bluish purple. And I did succeed with something here, which was trying to make it look like there were bricks in the path that I wanted to put through my arch. And then in the greens at the top, I could see a real difference in the style that I was developing here because on the postcard version, I had painted lots of detail everywhere. And you can see I'm developing a little different taste in how I render my plant life. At least when I've got enough area to work with, I'm more willing now to let some areas remain unfussed with and just starting to put in some suggestions of detail in some places and not all places. This one was vines that twist around a column and trying to get that twist to look right is something that is challenging because you have to think about what's in front of and what's behind at the same time. So that's a lot of what the lesson was all about. And this time, I think my flowers came out a little too delineated. I think it would have helped if I let some of that be a little bit looser. I do love what I did on the ground. So putting in the lines, the perspective lines really helped. My shadows really rocked on this one. But once I started putting the shadows on the back side of the columns, I kind of had to shade over the flowers, and that seemed to deaden everything. Whereas on the postcard version, I had that pop of yellow and just hadn't worried about things on the back side of the vines. And I kind of like that a bit better. And then we get to the wall of hydrangeas. There was a place that I used to live where this woman had the most amazing garden, and she just had this long wall. I loved walking past her house. Long wall full of a gajillion hydrangeas. And painting those as they were coming through the fence. So we're into the fences section of the course, and I wanted to help people to see if you're painting a fence like this that has something coming through it. You can paint the fence afterward, get all the flowers in, and then you can sort of just paint the lines so they stop, they come and go. So on my painting this year, I did a gajillion, gajillion of these hydrangeas. I did do a reel and showed how I built up my layers little by little. So I started with really pale color, went darker and darker and darker. And that was a good process to get flowers like this to look like those hydrangea clumps. The sidewalk was another challenge. I had to sketch it out a couple times to try to figure out what direction those bricks would go. Because again, if the perspective is off on the bricks, your whole painting looks off, even if you rock the flowers. So I practiced them separately before putting them into the painting. Is this lovely fence, a wooden fence instead of a metal fence? You can't paint this over top of your flowers generally. Yes, depends on the lighting of it, but learning how to paint flowers so they come and go and how to get that fence to fit in between them. So on my new painting, there were some things that were amazing. I think the flowers were so loose and so fresh, and I felt like I'm getting in the zone. And then the fence. The fence did not look all that great. And there's something about the darkness that I got on the original postcard that I think I missed here. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, because the flowers are just so great that, I just decided to leave it instead of fussing with the fence, which is something I don't do very often. It's just learning to leave it. Can you believe we're on day 20 already? 20 paintings. So we have a white picket fence this time, and a white picket fence requires a lot of negative painting. And I wanted to have some of the flowers in front of the white picket fence and some of them behind. And I did let it get simplified in behind the fence. It was a small painting, of course, because it's a postcard. You can't get a lot of detail in there. So I just kind of let it be a couple of different values of green. But on the 2025 Redux, goodness gracious, loved, loved, loved how this painting came out. I did it horizontal so I could get more of the fence in there. And since I was working larger, I could put some of the leaves, just some hints at them, in between some of those fence posts, which was great. And I remembered, fortunately, as I was doing this, to let some of the leaves peek out of the fence too, because I think that's something that could have helped the postcard on the left hand side. And the flowers here came out lovely as well. I did try painting this one as a quarter sheet painting, and it didn't come out all that great. I want to try it again and see if I can get this kind of rose to come out looking gorgeous like this. But I was super happy with this one at this size. I just think it felt much more like what I'm going for. Even the leaves in the background were some positives, some negatives, and they weren't overly fussy and they weren't overly like sloppy messy like I can get sometimes with my paintings. So now we have a much more simple white picket fence, and in the class we're, practicing with spraying water and different ways to create those sorts of clumps of bushes. And this year I used moon glow for the background instead of the Payne's blue gray on the left. And I didn't go quite as heavy in value on the plants because the background was lighter. So I wanted something a little fresher. And the lesson in the write up that I did in the class on this painting, I talked a little bit about how to do positives and negatives in bushes like this. So if you've already taken the class and you want to go back and just read those and get some tips, you can do that anytime. Next up, we have the blue door that has flowers above it, flowers on the stairs. So I'm starting to combine a bunch of different ideas from previous paintings in the class. There's a rock wall on the right hand side, and we've got this cacophony of flowers above the door. So this year's painting, I had more room to mess with it, so, had more space to play with the flowers, with the rocks in the wall. I told you I love my rocks, and the flowers didn't go quite as planned on the top, but there were some other things that I loved enough about it. I loved the door. I tried to keep it a little bit lighter and less oppressive than the one on the left because that just felt like those flowers were going to tumble down on the head of anyone who opened the door. So I wanted to keep it a little bit brighter and lighter. But the flowers required, once I got all this done, required a little gouache in order to make them come back out of all the green that I had put in there. So I had some struggles with that, but you know, there were just other things that I loved about it enough that didn't stress out about it. Then we have day 23, and this one featured some stairs and a doorway and just a whole bunch of pots. Turn people loose, make whatever kind of pots you want, whatever kind of plants you want, and then, some wall rocks and that sort of thing. Thinking of it more as like an adobe, like a southwestern kind of thing. But this year's painting went a totally different direction because I started out wanting to try a vertical with this to see what I could do. Made some steps with the same tile technique that I talked about earlier, and made something that felt like very, I don't know, not southwesty, more like more like something you'd find in my neighborhood with different kind of rock tiles. Lots of different plants, playing around with that, even some vine work coming in from that left up at the top. A tree, like a little manicured tree on the right. And then the door, I decided to make it a double door with one side, completely open. So you're being invited into the home, and the other side with the door and the doorknob. Now, this next one, I want to show you something that I've been doing in the classroom. And as I said, I didn't film videos for these, but on a whole bunch of them, I tried to remember if I could. And once I get painting, my brain leaves. But I was trying to remember to take pictures along the way and then put together like a little slideshow thing where you could see some step by steps. And it's not necessarily meant that you should go try this because I don't know where your level is at of your skill in painting, but I wanted to show you how I created what I did so that you could at least see, oh, I could do this in that painting, or you could take one of the steps and think about it for incorporating in something else. So in this one, it was a window that had a window box underneath of it with some pretty flowers. And what I decided to do this year was to try a different kind of window. And instead of painting these little four panes of glass in the window, I painted one big window and just filled it with color and just kind of let my colors run and play on the paper. But I stopped myself before I got to the flowers and painted around the flowers. So that required negative painting to get there. And that left me with putting in some architectural detail over top of that. So putting in those um, muntians. I don't know what they're called, those crossbars in a window. And then a little gray line around the outside. So there's a frame holding it in and painting the window box. Next up was to add the bricks to the wall, and that was very pale mixes of transparent red oxide with French ultramarine blue and yellow ochre in different combinations with each other. Very pale washes and letting them bleed together a bit so they don't become too oppressive, and dropping in the first pass of color for the flowers. And then I added more layers of color into the flowers, letting some of the highlights on those red flowers be captured by the whites that I had left when I did the negative painting above them. And that, I think, was one of the secrets that made this painting work really well. So here you could see painting in more dark details, putting in some of the stems, and doing just a little bit of detail work without doing too much, which is always really hard for me to determine which way to go. And then I added some trim, and if you have other things you want to clean up in the architecture, it's a great time to do that. And then I created a shadow on the wall down below the painting, and you can see it's much subtler than the one on the postcard, but I kind of liked it better. The postcard is more dramatic, but this was actually really subtle and beautiful and left the focus on the flowers rather than being so much about the lighting. And I think it's one of my favorites from this whole group. There's a few more favorites coming up, but I had a lot of successes here that were kind of interesting. And as I succeeded on this window, I wanted to try some other things with windows in the other upcoming window paintings. So day 25 was another window, and the one on the postcard felt a little bit on the clunky side, of course, because it's tiny and trying to get into that kind of smaller detail. I could have done with less window panes in there. But the flowers in this one, I absolutely loved the looseness of them. I loved the light cascading down. There were just a lot of things that I did love about the postcard. And then I got to painting the big one, and I painted the window first, and I used masking fluid instead of just painting loose blobs. That gave me a really crisp, detailed type of window, and I could paint those layers of the curtain to make sure that I got them looking like there was a window opening, and that was all great. The shutters came out fabulous. The wall came out nice and subtle and great. And then I got to the flowers. And while I'm not unhappy with the flowers, if they were in the context of another painting, they were not tight enough to match the curtain and the window, but they were not loose enough to just be expressive, which could have worked well. They didn't go loose and they didn't go tight. They were just somewhere in the middle. And I feel like there was a mismatch between them. But I don't think it's a failed painting because of that. I just think, yeah, I wish I had. And we're always going to have a wish I had about all our paintings. It's just going to be the way it is. But as we learn, we have less of those wish I had moments. Day 26, I called it a night window. And in this painting, it kind of came out looking night ish to me because the light is from the interior. It's that nice bright yellow and white and has these flowers that are being lit from behind. And I let some of the light cascade out onto the greenery and stuff. Well, when it got to this year's painting, I had more layers on this puppy than you could possibly imagine. If you go in the classroom and look at the step through slides, you'll see I was very proud of how I built up those layers because I'm trying to learn how to make bigger washes that join everything together so that I'm not having so many kissed edges. And when it comes to architectural stuff, planning through those things is important. So I made a more complex window, gave it more I guess more windowness to it rather than just a peak at the bottom portion of the window. Changed up the structure architecturally of the window and then let the light cascade out onto the flowers. Again, I did negative painting around some things so that those flowers could have those white highlights. You could always go back in with gouache, but I find gouache just never has the character that negative painting does. And then I worked really hard to let myself not get over detailed with the greens in here because I really wanted it to feel dark. And if you look at the step by steps in the classroom, I was almost there and it still felt like it was daytime. And then I did a big wash over the walls, over the shutters, and all of a sudden it felt like everything else got darker. And now looking at the one on the left, the postcard one doesn't feel like night at all, even though it had in the first place when I had painted it, it felt that way. Day 27 brought a flower stand, a little cart on wheels with an umbrella over top of it. And for this one, I let people have just a really simple sky background so that you could really get into all those flowers and all the containers, letting people just kind of invent their own buckets and their own blossoms and that kind of thing from everything they'd already learned in the class and showing how to paint the umbrella so it, looks like it's an umbrella with some dimension to it. This year, I decided to try to paint it so that it felt more like it was in a city. So let me pull up the big wash. Here we go. I painted the whole background all as one, and I included painting underneath of the umbrella. And the rest of it was just everything that's not white. And then went in with successive layers that would get, start carving into all of that white space. But with the umbrella, I painted the yellow right over that gray so that the top of the umbrella stayed nice and bright and the bottom of it was shaded, but with the yellow on top rather than painting the gray over the yellow. And that I thought was amazing. Just the way it came out was beautiful. I loved even the simplicity of how I kind of did a little negative painting on the signboard. I loved the way that the buckets came out. There's just so much I love in this. So that was one I felt really good about by the time I was all done. So this was day 28, a market that I've been to plenty of times before. They have hanging down signs, which I loved how this hanging down sign painted. It just came out great. I did some perspective so that we'd have a sidewalk underneath of all these plants and then turn people loose to just invent your own flowers in the buckets. Well, this time I decided to do something a little on the crazy side. And instead of just doing that more simple layout, I went back in my mind and I should have gone back to the market to go see it. But I had this memory in my brain about an arched door at one place. And I wanted to have light cascading in from the outside kind of onto the sidewalk, but then also light coming from inside the inner market because there's an inner market there too. And the final wash that I did to create that light was the thing that wrecked everything because it was great until then. And I think it might still read to people. You have to let me know if you see the same wacko things that I do. It just does not seem to work out. It's like the math is not mathing with the light. But the one of the things that wanted to point out, I was struggling with whether to put deeper shadows on the buckets. And I decided instead to make that differentiation of the sides of each one of them instead of going down each one with a shadow color to just put a band of a gray at the top and the bottom as if they're all designed buckets, designed containers. And you can definitely tell that there's several containers there without adding more detail to try to add more shadows. So sometimes you can do that with designs on an element rather than with actually adding shadows. So that kind of worked. Stuff. I do love the inside of the archway, the kind of colors that cascade down there. That was great. And even the sign here was nice, the hanging sign. But yeah, there's that one. I was happy to move on to day 29 with a flower a flower shop with plants in front of it. And in the class we talked about how to paint an awning, get the light on it, that sort of thing, and have all these shadows coming in across the sidewalk. So this year I went a little totally different direction. I changed the perspective, so I went left to right rather than right to left, and I branded my pots. I decided whoever this was in some like I'm picturing some shishi French floral shop that they could just have all red pots and some brown pots. So also in this one, I decided not to have flowers in everything because a lot of times you'll see plants for sale at floral shops. So it's more like, some plants and trees and things here, and then a whole bunch of cut flowers and, flower plants and that sort of stuff. And then letting some of the light hit the window so that it feels more like there's a window and a door there, rather on the postcard version, it all got dark. But again, you can't get all that detail in a small postcard. So that's why I saved this whole big idea for doing on a larger painting, even adding some very faint windows and another building and that sort of thing, because I had more space to do it. Now let's look at one of the other step throughs, and this is on my final painting in this collection of 30 of them. And this is a flower shop. It has stairs going up into it. And I realized after I'd painted that, and I was thinking about it again while I was painting this one, that if you're buying a bunch of flowers, you don't want to be walking up and down stairs. So whoever designed this idea is kind of silly. But nonetheless, I wanted, a nice round doorway with a nice big shadow, and then plants on kind of a tiered sort of rack or shelving or steps or something on the right hand side, some hanging plants, just letting people take all the lessons and start to put them all together into another painting. So here's my start. Again, one of these big washes that I did over the whole thing. All of that gray that you see is made with French ultramarine and transparent red oxide, and comes down the wall around the door, covers the whole door, and just leaves the plants as whites. And I did lighten up the color for the stairs and the sidewalk and added in some light blue in the windows, that sort of thing. Then I started adding in the browns. So I did all the pots in browns, and I added the door right over top of the gray that had been there because the door was going to get dark anyway. Wasn't really stressed out about it, but it helps keep down the number of kissed edges I have to have in a painting. And then started adding in a little bit more of the architectural detail, the bricks on the wall, the bricks around the round doorway this time. And this was also another opportunity to show students, you can do the same painting in grays for the wall instead of browns for the wall. It's like, everything's going to have a different flavor to it. But got more architectural detail in there and then in the windows and everything. And then just started adding in stronger shadows. That strong shadow inside the arched doorway gives it a little push to the background. So it looks like that doorway is receded because of that shadow. And then we've got, shadows behind all of the the pots and things, including shadows or reflections on the windows. Then started putting in the first of the greens and trying to vary the color of them, playing around with different colors in my palette that I can mix. And then we get to putting in a lot more details, a lot more flowers, lots more of all of that. But the detail here seemed to fit with the detail of all the architectural stuff that I put in there. So sometimes it works when everything is at the same level of detail, but when I sometimes would just go crazy on loose things in some places and tight things in others, it yeah, would go awry. And then when it got to the ending of this, I had this bottom area that I had intended on just having some little grasses, but I realized that line was too high. I needed the sidewalk to be down lower, and I painted a gray strip in there, and then it looked like a weird thing. So I had to start painting something else. It just, yeah, that section went awry until I had to use gouache to fix it. And like I said, I don't like the character of gouache and how it changes things. Doesn't look like watercolor necessarily, but for this, it was a small enough section that I think day 30 might be my actual most favorite painting. And I called this one Le Petit Jardin, which is the little garden, since I had these things that felt more like potted plants that I wanted to be sold here. And I still worry about anybody coming in and out so they don't fall down the stairs while they're carrying whatever it is they bought because there's not even a railing. Yes, whoever designed the building is going to get sued. But I still love the painting. So there's that. So that is my 30 paintings for the entire month of April and halfway into May. I did not finish in 30 days, but I feel really good about my effort. There were things about simplifying my watercolors that I achieved in a whole number of these paintings. I got more practice since I was doing it very regularly. I was painting a lot. I got more practice at those big washes all the way down a painting, those underlying washes that unify things, that bring it together so that I don't feel like I'm painting this little section and that little section. It's like the whole painting hangs together better. The flowers, sometimes I had successes and sometimes I didn't, but the times that I did gives me hope that I can get hold of this, that I can figure it out. So I'm going to keep working on it. I'm not looking at any of this as failure, even for the paintings that didn't go so well. But I'm also proud enough that I put them all in my shop for sale, and some of them have already sold. So if you're one that already bought one of these, thank you for that. I appreciate the support. But I'm also going to now put all of them on a bigger discount. So I have emailed my regular buyers that these are on a deeper discount. So a few more might be gone by the time you see this video. But you can go get a painting on a bigger sale and have a little piece of me for your walls. A little tip on these, they're eighth sheets and it's not a standard mat size. So, what I recommend, what I did for one of the paintings that was one of my practice ones that I wanted to keep for myself and framed, I ended up trimming it down so that it was smaller than the mat and I floated it in the frame. And what I mean by floating it is I put some dimensional adhesive behind it. So, like, you can take a mat for an 8 by 10, trim the painting down. All of them have a little space. You can trim them down, and float them inside an 8 by 10 mat. And then you don't have to buy a specialty mat or anything for it. So, there's that. So, go get yourself a painting on discount, and I will see you all in my next videos next week. And we're going to get into alcohol markers. So, be ready for that. And I will see you later. Be gentle with your self critiques. You're only comparing to you. I'll see you later. Bye.